Hi, everybody. I want to introduce Dr. Green. He's a dermatologist, and he's going to be leading our water cooler today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second water cooler series. And sorry for being a little late starting. We're going to talk today about how to be an effective advocate for your patients. And we talked last time about how we as physicians, as dermatologists, can be effective advocates for our specialty. And this time I want to talk about how to advocate for our patients. These are the people we serve. So I think it's important to do that because this is what we take care of. We serve the patients. So we're going to talk about it in a few ways. We're going to talk about how we can be advocates on a state and federal level. There'll be some overlap with what we talked about last time about being an advocate in general for our specialty, because there's overlap there. We're also going to talk about how to be an advocate means we work with pharmacies and PBMs and our organizations, as well as working with pharma itself, the people who make medications. Because being an effective advocate for our patients really means we want to get what they need. I mean, the people we serve. And that's not so easy these days. How often do we find that we can never get them what they need? Today, for example, I probably had 15 prior authorization forms come across my desk, and that's just one day. They all have to be filled out, they all have to be signed, and that's not even a guarantee the patient's going to get the medication we want to prescribe them. You know, it seems more and more that we as physicians aren't making choices on what's best for our patients. And I think that is probably the hardest thing that's changed over the last, many years, several years, 10, 15 years, is that we're not making choices. And we want what's best for our patients. We're supposed to be the ones who know. That's why we have the MD behind our name, not the insurer, not the pharmaceutical company, certainly not the PBM. And so it used to be that what we did was write a prescription, patients would go fill it, and the patient would get their medicine. The patient would come back and see us, and we can evaluate how they're doing. It's not like that anymore. It's very difficult. So a lot of what we do is becoming advocates for our patients. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So thank you for joining. And those of you not joining, enjoy listening to the podcast, which is being recorded as well. Okay, so let's talk about how to be an effective advocate for our patients from a regulatory, state, and federal level. We talked about this last time and how being an advocate, you can advocate on a state level, on a federal level, or a national level, and also on a regulatory level. So the same thing is true when it comes to being an advocate for our patients. We start, for example, by talking to our legislators, or our on a federal and state level, or people in regulatory agencies when we can't do what we think is best for our patients, when our patients can't, a lot of times they don't even know they can't get what they want. And our organizations do a lot of this for us, and that's why I mentioned how important it is to be part of a national organization like the American Academy of Dermatology Association, or the American Academy of Dermatologic Surgery Association, Mohs College. All these organizations have advocacy arms that they advocate for us, and we talked about that last time, but they're really also advocating for our patients. For example, the American Academy of Dermatology Association has committees of dermatologists who are dedicated. We're on committees for state policy, for congressional policy. In fact, there's an American Academy of Dermatology Association committee that deals with access to medications. The whole purpose of this committee is to deal with access, getting patients access to medications that we're no longer able to get, that we should be easy to get. So I'm going to give a little stop there because I didn't introduce myself, Larry Green, at the beginning, so I had a little difficulty calling in. I also want to mention, my apologies, that this water cooler series is sponsored by Equa Marketing, provides search engine optimization services and digital marketing services for dermatologists. So Equa, you are doing a great job, so I can't thank you enough for giving me this opportunity. And it's nice that these will be archived for people to access. So we're talking about organizations. Also, I talked about the American Academy of Dermatology Association that has committees that specifically are there to help us advocate for our patients. And the American Society for Dermatologic Surgery Association also has organizations. They have a state policy work group and that also is to help us advocate for patients and in terms of getting medications or procedures done that we think is important for our patients. So let me give you an example of, we were talking about regulatory, federal, and state ways that we can advocate for our patients. Let's talk about regulatory. Right now, the American Academy of Dermatology Association, the American Society for Dermatologic Surgery Association are trying to work with the USP, United States Pharmacopoeia, to continue to give our patients Novocaine mixed with something called sodium bicarb. Dermatologists have for years mixed, when we get a bottle of lidocaine, we add a little bit of sodium bicarbonate to it, to what we call buffer it. Lidocaine's acidic, as we all know, and that means it burns when you give it on injection. So we put in a little bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate, which is basic, and it neutralizes the acid in lidocaine. And the resultant mixture burns the patient much less. So when we remove skin cancer or anything we do surgically on the skin, we give an injection that doesn't hurt the patient nearly as much as it would have if we didn't buffer it. Well, you step back several years ago, I think 5-6 years ago now, where a pharmacy was not sterilely mixing injections in the spinal cord, and some people got very ill and I think even died. And so there's been a lot of backlash on the federal level, now on a regulatory level, to try and prevent this from happening. So us mixing lidocaine with bicarbonate is considered by some to be compounding. One of the some is the USP, the US Pharmacopoeia. Even though it's been done for decades and there's a track record of really no risk of infection because it's done in a way that's, first of all, it's not given to the spinal cord, but it's done in a way that's very safe and clean for the patients, and it's mixing. So we want to continue to do that, and here's an organization that wants patient safety, and it's being what happened 5 years ago. They want to be nothing like that to happen. It's their charge. So we are trying to come to terms with them, and we're working with them on a regulatory level so we don't lose the ability to make our lidocaine much less painful when we give it to our patients before skin surgery. That's something we are doing on how to be an effective advocate for our patients on a regulatory level. So the end is not, we don't have an end, we don't know what's going to happen, but we're trying to educate the USP and the FDA and the CDC as well, who's involved in all this, that the way we buffer lidocaine, we mix lidocaine, is very safe for our patients. It's been done for decades. And it's really helping our patients. This is something that patients don't realize, but it means that we're being an advocate for our patients in this respect on a regulatory level. And this is something that's going on now. There's always things that pop up and have to be taken care of when they happen. And who knew that 3 years ago, we would think that mixing a little bicarb like we've done since the late 20th century in lidocaine would be potentially not allowed to our patients. Who would have thought of that? But things happen, and you have to be prepared, and you have to work with the regulatory agencies that have jurisdiction in this matter. We want to be able to do it. We want to be able to do it safely. We want to advocate for our patients. So the ASDSA and the AEDA American Society for Dermatologic Surgery Association, American Academy of Dermatology Association, are actively advocating on behalf of our patients to make sure that we can continue to buffer our lidocaine and make it less painful for our patients. So that's an example, just one example of something on a regulatory level that we do for our patients. And that extends to working with CMS, which is Medicare. It extends to working with the FDA. I'll give you another example on working with the FDA that we're doing now. This is something that's we're actively doing the FDA's, and that's promoting new sunscreens to be approved. The FDA has not approved a new sunscreen in the United States since the last decade. Since the turn of the century. So that's almost 20 years. So while in Europe they have had new sunscreens approved over the last 20 years, we have not. We're still using the same sunscreens that in the United States that are in all over-the-counter sunscreens that we were using in the last century. Why is that important? Well, it's always good to have new ingredients in sunscreen. Why not get more advanced ingredients that can help protect the public? And the whole idea is broad spectrum protection is what we want. We want sunscreens that don't just protect against ultraviolet B rays, the burning rays of the sun, but also ultraviolet A rays, which are the deeper penetrating rays that are actually more likely to cause skin cancer. So we need both. We need what's called broad spectrum protection. When you look at a sunscreen bottle, you see UVB. Well, UVB only refers to protection, SPF, I should say. SPF only refers to the UVB protection. So when you see SPF on a bottle, you see protection against the UVB or burning rays of the sun. But that's not going to prevent most of skin cancer because the UVA rays are what cause skin cancer. So we need a broad spectrum protection. That's what we need to have on our sunscreen bottles. And that's something that is important, but there's not that many ingredients that are approved that offer broad spectrum protection. One of them is oxybenzone. And that's something we've had for, I think the 1970s, 1980s it came about. Don't quote me on that. But oxybenzone offers broad spectrum protection to a degree, but some places are banning oxybenzone. In Hawaii, they recently banned oxybenzone use in Hawaii because there's evidence from some studies, not on a large basis, just in the test tube, that oxybenzone can actually help ruin coral. It may bleach the coral. And we have a problem with coral. We have global warming that's probably harming the coral reefs. So there's already things going on with the coral. And people are thinking that oxybenzone is a contributor, maybe not the most important contributor, but it's a contributor that's something we can do about to help stop coral bleaching. Now, I personally think the evidence is out that oxybenzone does that, even though just because it does it in the test tube doesn't mean that it extrapolates to large oceans of the world. There's not that much oxybenzone in people in oceans where coral reefs are, but regardless, it's something that people are looking at, and something where jurisdiction in the place in Hawaii is already banning chemical. Well, we don't have many broad spectrum protection chemicals. We have zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, oxybenzone. There's not much more. In Europe, there are many more that are approved. So they have alternatives. We in the United States don't. So this is something, especially now where jurisdictions are thinking about banning one of the few chemicals we have that offer broad spectrum protection, that our associations on a regulatory level, we as dermatologists, and this isn't being advocate for our patients because they're not using sunscreen, they're going to get skin cancer. They're going to get burning rays. So we need sunscreen ingredients. So we want to work and lobby the FDA to approve new sunscreen ingredients that have already been approved actually for a number of years in Europe. So that's another example of something we're doing on a regulatory level. Let's talk about state level. What are things, how we can be an effective advocate for our patients on a state level? Well, there are numerous hurdles that have been put up by insurers and PBMs, and they always put in our way, like I mentioned, on patient access to medication. Like I said, there's an AADA, American Academy of Dermatology Association work group specifically on access to patient medication. One thing that is constantly put in our path is something called step therapy, also non-medical switching. Step therapy is a burden or a hurdle put on by PBMs, insurers. PBMs, again, are pharmacy benefit manufacturers, to prevent, that these things help prevent patients from getting medications we prescribe. So we are being an advocate for our patients. Our American Academy of Dermatology Association, the state policy committee especially, works on this to help states and dermatology societies in each state limit step therapy and non-medical switching. There are 19 states currently, I believe, that have laws that help limit step therapy. In 2019, I know that, or 2018, I should say, Minnesota and New Mexico passed legislation on step therapy. So basically, what we're trying to do is limit how many hurdles a patient has to go through. It's called step therapy to get a medication. In other words, if I prescribe medication A, the insurer, the PBM, wants the patient to use medication B. They have a better price for medication B, or medications B and C. So what they'll do is say, no, you can't have medication A. You got to have medication B or C before you get medication A. End of story. So what we've tried to do on a state level with advocating for our patients with our national organization, the American Academy of Dermatology Association, is to limit step therapy. So we'll maybe say, okay, if we write a prescription for medication A, and the pharmacy wants, the insurer, the pharmacy benefit manufacturer wants us to use medications B and C, we can provide a rationale for our choice for medication A, and they have to let the patient have it. Or if the patient is on medication A and all of a sudden the insurer gets a better price on medication B, or the PBM gets a better price on medication B and they want us to switch, we can be able to stay using medication A because the patient's doing well on medication A. So that's something that we limit in multiple states. We try and do it state by state. You can't do it throughout the country. This is state. So this is something we work on to have patients get access to medications that we prescribe. And that when I first started this phone call, I mentioned that access to medications is probably the biggest thing. I had how many prior authorizations today? I said there's probably 15, 20 prior authorizations today I had alone to do. And these prior authorizations are part of step therapy in a way. I chose medication A, insurer wants me to use medication B. Why should I not use medication B? I have to have a rule for saying for a reason that I want medication A. And that's something that without step therapy or without non-medical switching, non-medical switching again refers to switching when a patient's stable on medication A, they want it, and they get a better deal on medication B, they automatically have to switch to medication B. We don't want that. We want them to stay on medication A. So those things are things we do on a state level. And that's why these laws that the ADA works with the Dermatology Society in your state are so important. So I guess the first step is to work with the Dermatology Society in your state and let them know there's an issue. And then they can certainly bring it up to the American Academy of Dermatology Association.
Hi,
So
Dr. Green. Can we ask questions?
To do that. And if anyone's speaking, I apologize. I can't hear you. You have to type your message because I did not get a chance to, my speakers went off by accident just before and I was going to switch computers. Anyway, long story. So I do not have speakers, so please type your message and I will answer it. So feel free to type messages that you have and I'll go ahead and answer them because I want to make sure I answer all questions. Hopefully I'm not being confusing. So anyway, so we're talking about state ways on a state level to be an effective advocate for your patients. So we talked about step therapy. Another thing we're doing is trying to work on sunscreen. I have a question. Are they able to eliminate step therapy without price hiking for a medication that you recommend? So that's an excellent question. And they we want to eliminate step therapy for any reason. So that's going to price hiking is, say, a pharmaceutical company raises the price. There's a price for medication A, and the patient's been using medication A for 5 years, and all of a sudden the price goes up, and the insurer doesn't want to pay the new high price for medication A. So they put in a step therapy. So we have to prove why we want medication A, if we want medication A. So the price has gone up, and this happens a lot. So that's another reason that step therapy has been put in place, and why PBMs and insurers do step therapy, because medication A for 20 years has cost $20. Now all of a sudden, medication A is costing $150. And the insurer doesn't think that's fair, and they have a very good point. So they say, okay, you have to use medication B. All patients on medication A now have to use medication B. So, but my patient's stable on medication A. My job is to be an advocate for my patients. If I don't think medication B is going to work, now if I think medication B is going to work fine, there's no reason not to switch a patient if they think it'll, if I as a physician think medication B is going to work as well as medication A. But if I don't, then you want to help, you want laws that eliminate step therapy, and you want your patient to get the higher price medication. That may not be the best for the overall. It's not right that the pharmaceutical company's raising this price and it's getting what they want. I don't think that's fair. My job as a physician is to make sure the patient gets the best medication for them. And believe me, we know as physicians, we know, as you all know, we want to do also what's least expensive, because it all comes back to haunt us in the long run if we pick an expensive medication and there's a better alternative. But that's not always the case. So we want to be able to eliminate step therapy and still continue the patient on medication A if it's worth the price to the patient. And that's being an effective advocate for our patient. If its price has gone up way too much and medication B will work as well, or even almost as well enough to make the patient happy, you would want the patient to go to medication B, and you would need step therapy for that because they'll switch to medication B. Step therapy, I guess, is a way to that insurers and pharmaceutical benefit manufacturers lower costs by keeping the cost of medications down that we as dermatologists prescribe. And we need to have a good reason that patients want to have medication A and then should continue to have medication A. And if not, there's no reason to continue medication A. So I hope I answered that question. So what about sunscreen? You know, many states this year, due to the ASDSA, the American Society for Dermatologic Surgery Association, and some input from the AADA, American Academy of Dermatology Association, but mostly the ASDSA, passed laws that allow children to put on sunscreen in schools. So you don't have to go to a nurse to apply sunscreen. So that's important, being an advocate for our patients, because we're helping prevent skin cancer. It's a great public awareness message. But many states have laws that wouldn't allow children to put on sunscreen in class. You have to go to the nurse. Well, who's going to go to the nurse, leave their class and go to the nurse to get sunscreen applied, which is not even a prescription medication. It's not even a medication. It's an over-the-counter product. No one's going to do that. So the ASDSA has been advocating to allow sunscreen to be used in schools. And that's a big step forward. What about on a federal level? What are things that are happening on a federal level? Well, again, it goes back to getting access for medications. So the American Academy of Dermatology Association, this year, in the past year, in 2018, successfully encouraged Congress and had Congress passed and the president signed laws that prohibit pharmacy benefit manufacturers and private payers from including gag clauses in contracts with pharmacists that forbid them from telling patients that a medication may be cheaper out of pocket than going through their insurance. So that's a big step forward to being an advocate for our patients. And we initiated that. That's us. Patients didn't know. So, for example, if you go to the pharmacy and your copay for medication that your doctor prescribed you, that I prescribed you, is $50 based on your insurance coverage. And that medication is a cheap generic but it's still $50 copay. It's what your generic coverage is, but it's really $3 because it's inexpensive. Well, the pharmacies didn't have to tell you that. They may even have to notice that even. They would just say, okay, $50, I looked at your insurance, it's $50, pay $50. Well, now that's against the law. The pharmacies have to notice, and they have to know the lowest price. And that the Congress passed is specifically relating to Medicare, because that's all that Congress can do, but that hopefully it should trickle down to all insured patients. So, and I think it may have also been passed for plans as well, so not just Medicare. There were two bills. So that's something we did on the federal level. And how to be an effective advocate for your patient. We worked federally to make sure patients know the lowest price. That's very important. Who else can we work with to be an advocate for our patients? Well, we can work with especially pharmacies directly. We can work with pharmacies directly. We can talk with a PBM. I can tell you a story. I was at a meeting a year or two ago with PBM, one PBM chair or CEO, among other people at the meeting. And I was talking about how I write medications for psoriasis, and I pick the one that I think is best for the patient. And the CEO was alarmed. The CEO said, no, not alarmed. The CEO said, no, we have information that says you dermatologists just randomly pick a medication for your patients. We don't know why, maybe based on a lunch you got, a free lunch. I mean, they didn't really say that, but that was the implication. And there wasn't any rationale behind why we pick a certain medication for a patient. So I was surprised. I said, no, I really picked the best medication. I don't think you have correct information. So they have their reasons. And I said, for trying to stop us, or not stop us, letting us do what we think is best. They don't believe that we really have a rationale. So I said, what about if we provide a rationale? They said, fine, you have to provide the rationale, especially if a medication is being used for an unapproved use. Say, I want to give a medication for psoriasis that's not FDA approved for psoriasis yet. And I asked the pharmacy benefit manufacturer CEO why they wouldn't let us use this medicine. And the PBM had said, and I thought this was interesting, and I learned a lot from his answer. He said, well, we have people who back us. We have I don't know if they're private equity, I don't know who they are, but people financially back the PBM to hold, to prop up the PBM, make sure the PBM is financially solvent. And those people want proof that when someone's using a medication, especially one that's not FDA approved for that indication, that they want proof that it's safe for that patient. So they want, if it's not in the label, I guess is basically what this person, the PBM head said, if it's not in the label, we want proof of safety for patients. We can't have case reports. That's not good enough. We need good scientific evidence, because people will back us, won't give us money if we're recklessly approving medications that don't have a good indication for their use. So it never occurred to me that the reason PBMs don't want to use medications that may be not exactly approved, not exactly on label or FDA approved for that indication, was for legal reasons in a way. They need their backing, and they need scientific evidence to show that. So I thought that was very interesting. So I always want to make sure that we have good reasons to give a patient a medication that we're giving them. And that's what I learned from that. So we need to work with PBMs and provide good rational explanations, because they don't think we're rational. I learned that also, for prescribing a medication that we think is best for our patients. So I think that's another way to be an effective advocate for your patient. And that's to work with your pharmaceutical benefit manufacturer directly. Because they need proof, and they need good proof. They need good scientific evidence. And that's why I think it's important, if something's not on label, that pharmaceutical companies, not PBMs, the pharmaceutical companies do large-scale studies to show that their medication is effective for a condition that's not on label. I think that's very important. So that brings me to another way I think how we can work with how to be an effective advocate for our patients. And that's to work with big pharma themselves. We want to work, John, with PBMs. We want to work with big pharma themselves. PBMs and insurers, I should say. They raise the prices, and this was brought up for medications, and that's not sometimes, and that's not really fair. They raise the price. Medication was $10 for 20 years, and all of a sudden it's a generic, and the price goes way, way up. The generics pricing right now, sometimes prices of generics are just as high as name brands. In fact, Congress is investigating collusion among generic manufacturers right now, so that they've had these dinners supposedly where they meet up and they talk about how they're going to divide up the medication so there's only one or two generic manufacturers manufacturing the medicine. In other words, they'll take medications A through D and said, hey, you take medication A, I'll take medication B, you take medication, another one will take medication C. So there's no competition for these generics. So they can artificially inflate the price of generics. So generics now a lot of times has become just as expensive as name brands. So we need to work with big pharma to help out in these situations with the rising cost of medications and the stopgaps that have been put on step therapy, or they have step therapy stopgaps and that the insurers and the PBMs put on. So we talked about working with the PBMs. We talked about working with regulatory agencies and state and federal agencies. But we also need to work with pharma. That's important on being an effective advocate for our patients. We need to be friendly with pharma. As much as I think pharma can be a thorn in our side in a lot of ways, raising the price of medications, but they can help us. I mentioned about them doing large-scale clinical trials for off-label uses. But that's one thing. But that's another issue. We can work with them on an individual level to be advocates for our patients. We can ask them for free samples. We can ask them to help us with working with the prior auth of the step therapy protocol. See what the experience they've had for getting overrides on that from other dermatologists. They have a lot of information they can give us that can work with us to help make our patients get the medications that they need. So I think working with pharma is something else that we can do, and is another way to work together on a different level to be an advocate for our patients. We need to do things ourselves too. Prior authorizations are something like I said at the beginning of this call, this podcast, I had 15 to 20 prior auths today alone to go through. So we need to be there for our patients. We can't blow that off. Our MAs can help us, our nurses can help us fill them out. Electronic prior authorizations are sometimes easier, not always easier. But we need to do them. And I mentioned how pharmaceutical companies can help us fill this out. We actually have in our organization, the American Academy of Dermatology Association, the work group that works on access to medications has on the American Academy of Dermatology website they've created prior auth letters that are ready to just plug in numbers and print out on our own for many of the medications we have trouble obtaining for our patients. So going to the URL aad.org/prior auth will take you to that web page, and we can have letters written or pre-print letters pre-made for us, so just to plug in numbers and little specifics to get that prior auth written for our patients. So that's another thing that we can do to help us get patients the medications that we need, especially if they're off-label. I think at the aad.org/prior auth website, I think they're only talking about on-label, but there may be some off-label uses as well, like for example, protopic tacrolimus for psoriasis. Because off-label, like I mentioned, not on the label, I think is a whole other issue about being an effective advocate for our patients. We have our on-label issues with medications that are expensive, and that's why stopgaps are put in by insurers and PBMs. But we have the off-label use. There are many medications we use off-label that prior authorizations are needed and that can help us get the medications we need for our patients. So another example would be spironolactone for acne, or maybe which is a generic, or that we often use, or Otezla for something other than psoriasis. It's a psoriasis medication. Those are examples of things we do that we can get our patients the right medication, helping get our patients the right medications that they need. So we talked about ways. I'm going to try and summarize for the next few minutes on how to be an effective advocate for our patients, and we'll summarize everything for us. We talked about how we want to advocate for our patients on a state and federal level, a regulatory level. We want to work on a more one-to-one level with the PBMs when we can. We want to work with big pharma when we can. They should not be our enemy. None of these people should be our enemy. And we talked about working with our organizations, talk about working with our own staff. So important. So I'll summarize just a little more in depth. We talked about how we can work with our state dermatology societies. That's always the place to start. And they can help us get in touch with our national dermatology organizations, which I mentioned, AADA and the SDSA, among others. We talked about how these organizations work with regulatory agencies, state legislators, and federal legislators as well. And we talked about some of our accomplishments with these organizations: inhibiting step therapy, indoor tanning and skin cancer prevention, getting bills allowed that children can apply sunscreen in schools. We talked about how there's a website to get prior authorization letters from our national organization, the AADA, aad.org/prior auth. We talked about working with pharmacies and PBMs, telling them why that medication is best for their patient. They're backed. They have reasons for wanting to make sure that the medication we choose is best for the patient, if it's very expensive. Even if it's generic. There may be, like I said, there's many generic medications. And especially for that medication, even if it's generic, is off-label. A lot of what we do in dermatology is off-label and off-label treatment. And it's important to get the best medication for our patients. So we talked about working with pharmaceutical companies also. Don't refuse pharmaceutical companies in your office. Please meet with them, my suggestion. Get samples from them. Talk with their sales reps. You never know when they can help you get a patient that you think needs a certain medication, that medication. Very, very important. We talked about, yes, it's a hassle, but we need help in our office. We need to do prior authorizations every day. That's part of being an effective advocate for our patients. It doesn't get us any money, but we want to, but the truth is it's how we advocate for our patients. We want a patient to have a certain medication. We think that medication is best for that patient. We need to go to bat for that patient. Otherwise, the medication will be chosen for our patient, which is fine if it's not a big deal. But if it's the medication you really want for your patient, it's very important. So that's something we need to continue to do, and something we need to do to advocate for our patients. So work for our patients. That's our goal. Take the time. It all comes back to taking the time and putting in some effort. It's not about putting your head down, and I mentioned this in the last podcast, burying your head in the sand and saying, it is what it is. I just want to see 50, 60, 70 people a day. If they can't get the medication that I want to, so what? whatever the pharmaceutical company wants or PBM wants or insurer wants, fine. If that's okay, that's fine with you. If you're not worried when you're doing skin surgery about burning your patients a little more with unbuffered lidocaine, fine. But I don't think that's being an advocate for our patients. We're in public service as physicians. We're here to serve the needs of our patients. We're in customer service, I should say, not public service. We're in customer service. We are in public service too, but customer service is a better way. It's not that necessarily the patient is always right, but we want the patient to be happy and better. And that means giving the patient, we think, the best medication that will help that patient. So customer service in the way that we want the best and happiest customers. We want to do what it takes to give the best and happiest customers. That's the customer service I'm talking about. That's how we be an effective advocate for our patients. It's about customer service and about doing the things and taking the time, putting the effort to get the medication we think is best. So I would encourage everyone as I close to go out there and try and be a customer service advocate for our patients. Be there. Have help, but do the prior authorization forms. Work with your state dermatology society on trying to get better laws in your state on inhibiting step therapy, or doing public service things like allowing children to put sunscreen in schools on, helping us better get off-label medications we know are safe for our patients. These things, and giving patients samples, and working with pharmaceutical company to get patients even free medicine if we can't get a medication, temporarily free medicine if we can't get a medication approved for our patient that we want. That's, I think, what we need to do. That's how we be an effective advocate for our patients. And it takes effort. It means not burying your head in the sand, but we're in customer service again, and I think that's the way we need to look at it. But everyone is there to help. We're not alone. We're not sitting on an island. Our people want to work with us. There's no enemies. PBMs are not the enemy. Insurers are not the enemies. Big Pharma is not the enemy. And our national dermatology societies are certainly not the enemy. They're our biggest help. And everyone encourages and really likes dermatologists to step forward and make an effort, especially when it's on behalf of their patients. So I would encourage everyone to do the customer service and work with their patients. So I have a question here about, do you find when you have been using a medication for an off-label use and it gets approved for that use, does the price go up? I don't know if the price goes up. So I was wrapping up and now I was gonna say I'm open to questions. I'll start with this question. So again, the question is, do you find when you have been using a medication for an off-label use and it gets approved for that use, does the price go up? If enough people are using that medication, the answer to that question is I don't know. It's a great question. I don't know. It depends if the medication is generic or not generic. And even if it's not generic, I don't know if the price would go up, because the price goes up for, who knows why pharmaceutical companies or generic companies raise their price of medication. I don't think using it more necessarily raises the price. I think it also depends on competition with that medication. That's a great question. I don't have an answer. I know, for example, for cosmetic indications, things like botulinum toxin, the price may go up the more medication is used, or other, I shouldn't single out that one, or other cosmetic products. I find that, but I can't say I really find that in big pharma. That's just my opinion, and it's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. So from that, not having a great answer, but I hope I summarized well enough. And I'm going to close. We have one more question real quick. Do you have any tips for being effective when advocating to eliminate step therapy for a patient? So I think the way, and this goes back to summarizing, for eliminating step therapy has to be done on a legislative agenda. So that's something you have to work with your state dermatology society. What is the step therapy law in your state right now? Does it have a step therapy law? If it doesn't, that's something that the ADA State Policy Committee can certainly help you with, because that committee knows what step therapy laws are in every state, what's been passed in every state, what's not been passed in every state. So if you don't know, you can certainly go to the State Policy Committee of the AAD and ask. But they also have a resource to help you get, again, not on your own, but with your state dermatology society, step therapy, anti-step therapy laws passed in your state, or at least limiting step therapy, because you're never going to complete elimination of step therapy. I should say lessening of step therapy laws, so that you don't have as many hurdles to get your patient the medication that you want. So I think the tip would be to go through your State Dermatology Society and the ADA, the State Policy Committee of the American Academy of Dermatology Association, and work with that organization and come up with and create legislation that's already sort of probably pre-created for you. And then you go to your state medical society from your state dermatology society and try and get legislation passed in your state if the legislation is not so good in your state. That's my tip. It's not something you can do on your own. It's something that has to be done as a whole, as a whole part of medicine that all medicine agrees with. And I talked about this last time in the podcast on being an effective advocate on a state and federal level. But you can't do anything on your own. We even, as dermatologists, really can't do anything on our own. We have to work with the House of Medicine. And that's something we have to work with, because legislators listen to lots of people coming together and asking about something, not one thing. And dermatology is small. We have to do it with everyone. And in general, medicine is very attentive to us. So they want us to listen. So I have another question. Is there a resource that provides information to the state organization and who the contact would be for those wanting to get involved in the state level? Well, every dermatologist, I hope, is a member of their state dermatology society. And that's something we want to pay dues for. And that's a way to get started on the state. Every state dermatology society has a president, vice president, but we're members. And it's not something that, the state dermatology society doesn't exist just as an advocate, although I think that's an important resource, but it exists for CME for us. It really exists for our benefit. But we want to have benefit for who we serve, and that's our patients as well. So every good state dermatology organization should also have a lobbying arm that is out there for our patients. So those who want to get involved on a state level, go to your state dermatology society. And for those who don't have a state dermatology society, go to your state medical society. They'd love to have dermatologists get involved. And they're always listening for dermatology issues. When I talk to my local county medical society, as well as my state medical society as an individual, not as a part of the state dermatology society in the state I live, they always want to hear what I have to say. Of course, I want to get my state dermatology society involved, because one person is not enough, the more the better. But doctors always want to stick together, especially when it comes to advocating for our patients. That's not something that's self-serving for dermatologists alone. That's something that is for everybody, the whole house of medicine. So that's why I think that you never want to do it alone again. Yes, we want to advocate for our patients alone with our MAs and on prior auths in doing that, but we don't have to even do that alone. We want to work with pharma can help us on that. The PBMs can even help us on that if we want to make the effort. I think it's not right to treat it as like the other side is the enemy, no matter what side that is. We're all here to help our patients. We all have different points of view and frames of reference on helping our patients. But we all need to come together and find out a way to advocate for our patients to do what's best. And I think that's why it's important not to, I know there are many, I mentioned this before, there are many dermatologists or even universities who won't let sales reps come in their office because they think that's going to unduly influence the physicians. I think that's a mistake. You have to know, of course, they're coming from a biased frame of mind, a biased reference. But I would encourage everyone to let them in, make the time for them, because they provide a valuable resource for us that we can help our patients with. whether it be samples or information sheets for our patients that have to go through FDA approval vetting process before they give them to us. So they have to be somewhat unbiased. Whatever it is, I would encourage us to work with everyone we can to be the best advocate for our patients in that respect. So if there's no more questions, I want to thank Equa Marketing again, who sponsored this podcast. And I hope, I thank everyone who participated. And I apologize again for not having people able to talk into the recording, just having text questions. And look forward to next month's podcast series, where we can continue talking about advocacy. Because that's what we are about as physicians. We're in customer service. We want to be there, help our patients the best way we can. So with that, I'll say good evening and thank you.